Hey guys, so today I want to talk about a really fascinating manuscript for you, which in the Gothic Discord I've been dubbing the Ostrogothic Cookbook. This is BNF MS Latin 10318, and we're looking at the excerpts from Apicius made by the quote-unquote illustrious man Vinodarius, and we'll get to his name in a second. The link to this manuscript will of course be in the description. So what this is it's a cookbook, and it's a cookbook of recipes taken from the late Roman author Apicius. Now, Apicius, writing in the 4th century, wrote a list of fairly exorbitant, elaborate Roman food recipes, which seem to have been targeted at a relatively wealthy audience. And this was a very popular cookbook, which was much copied and not translated, but circulated throughout the Middle Ages. Now this here, the red headline here says that they are, if I can scroll in for it, they are, no, I need to go up. They are Apici exerta a Vinidario vir in lustro, and that's what that sort of is short for. So excerpts of Apicius made by the illustrious man Vinidarius. Now the reason that I call it sort of an Ostrogothic cookbook is that Joseph Wheeling in 1936 claimed that this Vinidarius was actually a Goth. It was a Gothic name originally, which he reconstructed as Vinitharis, which I don't know the etymology of what that would be or how realistic his reconstruction is. I do have to point out also that this manuscript is written in Italian uncial, Italian or Roman style of uncial of the 8th century. So it's after the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy, but it could be a copy of an earlier text. And the fact that it's written in uncial and not in some kind of minuscule suggests that it's a relatively high status text, this. Now, all this notwithstanding, we have to remember that the Ostrogothic kingdom and basically all of Italy after the fall of the Roman Empire was living in a state where trade connections to the east were less secure, and so access to exotic herbs and spices, which made the cooking of Apicius possible, wasn't so readily available. So all of the varied ingredients couldn't be included, and this affected the cooking of the Middle Ages. But then we can see this reflected also in the excerpts of Apicius made in this book, as we can see. Now, the title given there, Excerpts of Apicius, is interesting because, as we're going to see, not all of the items in this book or in this list are in fact originally found in Apicius' text. So either these items are things which were originally in, say, one version of Apicius' text, which didn't happen to circulate with the other versions of the text, or they are inventions of later centuries, maybe the 5th or the 6th or the 7th century, which were included in this as alongside other recipes which do seem to genuinely come from Apicius, even if they're modified a little to reflect the lesser availability of these exotic ingredients. And another one of the interesting little bits that he has here is something which seems to resemble the first book of Apicius, which, rather than containing recipes, seems more to be about general maintenance, like how you keep your ingredients fresh, how to properly store things, etc. And this red line here in this sort of interesting capital script, which, if my paleography professor Julia Crick is correct in telling me, it has script, a capital script like this is quite common in medieval manuscripts, but it doesn't yet have a name. So that's a task out there for somebody to do. So it's what it is brevis pimentorum quae in domo esse debeant ut condimentis nil desit, which is a short list of the sort of, well, literally pigments, but spices, which should be in the home so that nothing when also so that nothing shall be absent from the condiments, so that you have a full cabinet basically. And here follows a really long list of herbs and spices which we have been translating into Gothic, because of anything, this text is probably one of the most exciting things to have in the Gothic language. But the list itself is not part of Apicius's original Roman text at all, so it's definitely, if not medieval, then at least very late antique. And you can see it in the names itself. Something that's very common is that final M's are dropped off. Now, this is something that happened in Vulgar Latin texts quite a lot, but not in formal Latin at all. So what this means is it's possible that this text is simply, the scribe is writing in Latin but is not very well educated, and is therefore writing down the Latin he's hearing or she's hearing and simply dropping off the M's, because the UM ending in Latin words would have been pronounced as an U in Vulgar Latin, and in medieval and sort of late Vulgar Latin, this sort of just changed to a regular U sound or an O sound, and it later developed into what we have in the Romance languages. But it seems very common in this manuscript, especially in the parts which seem to be added for the final M to be left off, like crocu, folio, costu, cardiofilo, cardamomo. In fact, it seems to be left off more than it's included in this list, which is extremely interesting. There are more interesting elements also. In this list we can see all sorts of early sound shifts, which would indicate that this text is written either in a very late form of Latin or a very early form of Italian. And it could be a case that this list is code switching, that basically it's sort of a mixture of Latin and early Italian, or, as they might have understood it, it may be a mixture of proper Latin and more vulgar Latin. So I'm going to look at these two words here. So, bacca rute and semen ruce. Now, bacca rute is sort of, the rue berry, and semen ruce is, semen eruce, my bad. Oh no, sorry, those are different things. But, well, here, these two words are a good example of one of the sound changes I was trying to do. This is before I realised I chose the wrong words. So, we have semen rute and bacca rute. Now, the R-U-D-E, R-U-T-E are in fact the same word in Latin, and what this indicates is that the D and the T are sounding interchangeable in the dialect of whoever is either reciting this Latin or whoever is recording or writing this or copying this Latin. I think the high number of phonetic mistakes indicates that at a minimum this text was recorded from dictation. Somebody was reading aloud this text and the scribe was writing it down, meaning there's all sorts of opportunities for phonetic spelling mistakes to introduce themselves to the text. What else do we have that we can comment on here? We can see more final dropping in cumino and enesu. We can see here in this word sisama, which is commonly sesama. We can see a confusion of E for A, and likewise, E for I, and likewise with these words semen rute and bacca rute. In classical Latin or even vulgar Latin, these would have been AE, and they would have been pronounced semen rutai and bacca rutai. Now, the fact that this diphthong has simplified to an E indicates that this is a phonetic change which has already happened in their pronunciation. So, if we go down, so the beginning of these lists is just a list of the various things you need to have, the various herbs and items you need to have in your kitchen so that you don't lose anything. So you've got example pepper, ginger, lassa, and the list goes on. This subheading is says from the seed you have these. You have papaver, rue seed, rue berry, laurel berry. I don't honestly know what most of these are. Even the English words, I don't know what they are, so I'm not going to comment too much on them. Down here you have or among the dried herbs you have these, and there's another very long list which we are going through. So here's a very interesting bit here. Let me see if it's a part of a long one. Yes. Okay, so this little bit here is very interesting, because what this is an eCal data, and it was a thing that was just beginning to come in this time. And what it normally is an eCal data is meant to indicate that the little tail at the end is meant to indicate that there was an A before the E, which has not been written, even though the original, even the classical Latin word for cepa, which is onion, did not have an A before the E. So it's very curious that they've added this. This might be a case of what's called hypercorrection, where a scribe is aware of a spelling mistake or a common spelling mistake, and they try to compensate for it, but they overcompensate. A common thing happening in documents in this period, and we can see it again, by the way, up here in the word cepa. There's another caudata up there. We can see this happening often when they write the word for Italy. They sometimes write Hitalia instead of just Italia, which is very interesting. But one last one also, well, not last, but another one also is here. We have the word aneth, which I assume is short for aneth or anethi, and this is dill, anethum. But what's interesting about it is that the th sound, which I believe comes from Greek originally, is being represented by a t, and it was normally written orthographically with a th in Greek words. But the fact that they have not written the H, I think, indicates that they're not pronouncing the TH as a thorn when they're saying it. They're saying anet or anethum, or anetum, not anethum. So this word here, if I can zoom out to the right amount, Ascolonia, which the scribe here has corrected, and by putting a dot in the middle of the O, which basically is like crossing it out, and written the A above it. Now this is quite interesting. I think to me it indicates possibly that there was a schwa-like vowel, or that perhaps just the O and the A in these circumstances sounded quite similar in the dialect of whoever was speaking. Though again, this is extremely interesting stuff. What else do we have that's interesting to comment on? We see another E for an I distinction in oreganum, for oregano. This U with a line above is just a simple manuscript convention where final M's are omitted and they're shown with a line above the last vowel. That's quite common. We have juniperum for juniper. Now that's quite an interesting one as well, because I believe in most Latin texts it's actually written uniperum, that is with an I at the beginning, not a Z. So that's a very curious sound change, which may be indicating the beginnings of the sort of je sound as we see in Italian, like in giocare, or giocare for to joke, from the Latin giocere, meaning sort of to joke or to laugh. What else do we have here? Now here's a very, very interesting one, which might indicate possible Gothic influence on spoken Latin. Okay, so in the Germanic languages, let me see if I've gotten this right. The P sound, when I think it's well, the P sound in certain contexts, it might be when it's between vowels, becomes softened to a fricative. So what this word is meant to say is citri pastinaka. Citri pastinaka in sort of vulgar or classical Latin, but the scribe has written citri fastinaka, and I think that it's possible. Again, I don't know, I'm not too familiar with the phonological rules of Gothic, and if anyone knows better, please correct me in the comment section. But what this could be, especially if it's written in Rome or somewhere in the north of Italy, this could indicate the sort of influence of Gothic accents on the dialect of Italian spoken at this time. It's really curious. What else do we have? So concerning the liquids, we have these ones, and there's, aside from the usual stuff I mentioned of dropping the U, there's not too much that's that interesting here. Here is an interesting one. So nuces mayores are sort of large nuts, and then we have nucleus pineus. So the Latin word is nucleus, and curiously also it's not very grammatical because the classical Latin would be nuclei pinei, sort of for pine nuts, but they've given it basically in what in classical Latin looks like the accusative, whereas, well, this here is ambiguous, it could be either, but given the fact that these like menta, nepeta, these words above seem to be in the nominative, you would imagine the rest of the list should be in the nominative. And I think what this means is they think that this is in the nominative, or that the nominative accusative distinction isn't being shown too much in words of the time in their dialect. So they don't see anything wrong with writing nuces mayores and then nucleus pineus. So not only are they losing the diphthong, nucleus is becoming nucleus, but they're losing the sense of grammar underlying Latin, and it's turning into Italian. Or we're sort of seeing a code shift where parts of this text may be written in more correct and more grammatical Latin, and some of it are written in Italian. Here's another one as well. It is a very curious one, acmedula, which I am fairly sure is meant to say amygdala, which is the Latin for nuts. Now which is the Latin for almond. And there's all sorts of really interesting things happening there. So first of all, we have there's a C sort of being added before the M of amygdala. The G is also being dropped and not being pronounced. So in the manuscript we have amidula, not amygdala. Very curious stuff. And we have a C added in acmedula, but we have a C taken away in dactylos, which should be pronounced dactylos. So it's possible here that the C is just not being pronounced in this person's dialect. And here is a really interesting example. An example that indicates that perhaps this wasn't even necessarily thought of as Latin at all. So what we have here is uba pasa, but it's been corrected from uva or uwa pasa, from two U's and an A. It's been corrected to uba, which means eggs. And in Vulgar Latin, and even in sort of late Latin, what we now write as the V in modern Latin text was pronounced as a B. So UVA would have been pronounced uba. And so this is not even bad Latin, but the fact that it's a correction is very interesting, because the sort of orthographic standard was actually to write in the V. Writing a B instead of a V is something that a less educated writer would do. So the fact that they've gone back and changed this to a B, to me indicates that they're not maybe necessarily thinking about this as Latin per se. They're thinking about it as just like the vulgar language. It just happens to be very similar to Latin still at this time. Now they still have, for like this last sentence here, which seems to be the only sentence, like complete grammatical sentence, at least in this first page of the edition, which says Hec omnia in loco si compone neodorem et virtutem perdant, which is place all of these in a dry place lest they lose their smell and their strength. And this is correct Latin, there's nothing really wrong with it. Again, we can see the e caudata very interestingly. And then here we have a list of the foods. Another curious one, they're writing they're confusing the I with the Y, but that's relatively common. in medieval orthography. And then we have a list of all sorts of different dishes. We'll go on to the next page. Now, what do we have? There is one particular dish we are going to... Here we are. So, dish number... Goodness. This is... Dish number... Yes, 24. Porcello exosome. We'll pay special attention to that later, but that's a list of all the dishes. And then finally you get down here to the actual foods themselves, and this is Cacabina Minore. Now I want to talk about this title, Cacabina Minore. Again, it's showing one of the beginnings of Italian sound changes. So Italian, quite famously, very rarely has words ending in consonants. It's almost always a vowel. Now, cacabina minore, unless it is in the ablative case and it's meaning with a sort of smaller casserole, is not really grammatically correct. It should be in the nominative here. And the fact that it's not, again, indicates to me that they're not seeing a distinction, or not seeing a worthy distinction between the ablative, nominative, accusative cases. They're not really caring very much about their cases if they're adding that E to the end of minor. And here's another interesting example. They've left off the H in the word cholera, which is another word which I think comes from Greek, and it means herbs, so or like plants, leafy plants. And this is various herbs. Very interesting. There is a quick word worth saying about Apicius. So some of these recipes are in fact taken from Apicius. Just very quickly down here we have the word malvas, and that's in classical Latin written malvas, so you can see the VB distinction at work again. Some of these recipes are taken directly from Apicius, at least the text, but the instructions seem often to be quite simplified. They seem to resort to using commands such as elixa and interse, sort of boiled and sort of mixed together. Some of the phrases seem to be more Apician in their tone, so si volveres condis liquamine blah blah blah. You know, if you wish to, you can sort of set it up with liquid and oil, blah blah blah. But this whole manuscript definitely looks like a rephrasing of Apicius rather than copying straight from the classical text or the sort of late classical text. What's interesting with this also is that many of the texts use different ingredients, usually a shorter list of ingredients and simpler cooking instructions, perhaps indicating that the kitchens of Ostrogothic Italy simply didn't have the same means to cook exorbitant dishes as you have in Apicius's original text, luxurious dishes like this. So this is, and again, here's an interesting one. Oh well, no, that does make sense actually, because it's in the accusative, because it's right down afterwards. So ignore that. So let's go on now, and one last thing that's penultimate thing I suppose, which is quite interesting to note, is some of these names. So Pisces in Otacano, and we have Pisces in Otogono. Well, actually, I believe that's probably the same thing. It's probably that Togono and Tocano are close enough to be confused for each other. Which again is a rather interesting sound change. Perhaps they're not using a CG distinction as much. But this seems to be just a person's name, and this I think suggests that there are certain regional cooks beyond just and there are names, Greek names of cooks in Apicius's manuscript original text as well. But this indicates that there are some cooks whose recipes are not found in Apicius, who became famous enough in the meantime that their works get included alongside Apicius's more prestigious or more well-known recipes. Quite interesting stuff. Yes, that's just more of the recipes. There's the IE distinction again, and also the loss of the H. So patinas oleardum ex obis. That's meant to say holeardum, and this is meant to say ex ovis. Very interesting things. So we're almost at the recipe that I want to talk about in particular. Here we are, porcello exodiomo, and this is very interesting because this particular recipe is not included in the list of Apicius's original pork recipes. I checked, even though, say, the other ones, the ones right below it and the ones right above it, are in fact from Apicius. So this is an addition trying to masquerade itself as one of Apicius's original recipes. But the ingredients of it are quite different because all of the other pig recipes seem to contain lovage, as an example, ligisticum, and this does not contain that. Also, this is very precise in its ingredients. It recommends, say, 1 pint of water here, 50 grains of pepper, blah blah blah. So it's more precise in its instructions. It's different in its wording, its phrasing, and most importantly, the name is different. So the name of this one here is Porcellum lacerdatum, so sort of laser pork. This here is Porcello exodiomo. Now, it is possible with this O that what is happening is that this would have been pronounced Porcello, and the scribe has been correct there, and they've missed it off there. The U, so if we chop off the M, for instance, we just have Porcello versus Porcello, and U and the O are often interchangeable in late Latin. This is true, they often got confused for each other. And later on, he does seem to get it right, like we have Porcello here. But I think what this is this is the name of the dish, and exodiomo is sort of presumably somebody's name, is taken from the sort of early Italian name of the chef who is reciting this recipe, and the scribe is just copying it down as they're hearing it. So I suppose what I'm most excited about is that in this, on the pages of this manuscript, we might be hearing directly from the Ostrogothic kitchen, from the sort of kingdoms of the barbarian inhabitants of the Roman Empire, and we can hear them talking about the foods that they ate, which is just so exciting. And I can testify that I have made this recipe, and there will be a video following this showing my process of making it, because it gives very precise instructions and it is really delicious. I highly recommend it. So that has covered all of the points that I wanted to look at in this video, really. It's a fascinating manuscript, and in the Gutowig's Discord we are working together on translating this into Gothic, because what better text to have in the Gothic language than a cookbook possibly containing original Ostrogothic food recipes. So yeah, thanks you guys for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into a fascinating Ostrogothic manuscript, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!